Time for some rogue builds. Roll it. Welcome back, fellow rogues and other classes who are watching this video and are jealous of us and want to be us. It's that time again. Time for a build video, but this time around things are going to be different. As some of you already know through my community post and via Discord, I have been struggling with how I should do this multi-build video idea of mine. Should it be one huge 1 hour long video that would make me jump off the bridge and murderize myself, and possibly any innocent bystanders under the bridge? Or should I just simply break the builds down into multiple separate videos so it's easier for you, the viewer, to focus on? So this will be the first video of a series called Pick Your Poison. There should be anywhere between 4 and 6 videos in total. Maybe more if I think there should be more, but let's just take it one step at a time. First off, these builds will be endgame focused, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be a goal for newer players to try to achieve, and they can also get a sense of direction when it comes to what they might need to be a badass little McStabby McStabberson, or an insatiable peanut stabber, or a little Shank Sinatra if you will. So, how is this going to work? First, I will explain what stat caps need to be achieved as a rogue. I know most of you already know this, but some new players might not, so I will do it anyways just for them. Then I will show you my race choices, followed by my ability stat choices both in the character creation screen and the in-game character sheet. Then we'll go to the Paragon path chosen and why. Then I will show you all the gear choices made for this build, which will include the main gear, enchantment choices, weapon choices, modifications, armor reinforcements, artifact choices, companion choices, both summoned and utility, along with the companion gear used in this build. Also the mount equip power and combat power I have chosen, of course also what collars are being used, the insignia bonuses, and what type of insignias are being used individually. Then I will go to Feats, Boons, and the power trade choices. And you will also see at the beginning of the video the consumables I will be using because they are important to all builds when it comes to capping the stats you need. However, after I have shown you all the choices, then I will explain why every choice was made, along with a ranking system I have created to rank each piece of gear accordingly. This is what the ranking system will look like. On the top of the screen will be the ranking system itself, which will be insane, amazing, great, good, average, or shitty. And below is what I will be ranking. The item level, the combined rating, the bonus of each thing if there is any, the cost if any, the RNG if any, accessibility, and replaceability. And at the very bottom where it can be found or grinded for. And obviously the name of the gear or the item in question will be on this image as well. This is just an example so you know what to expect moving forward. Then obviously I will show you the stat caps achieved using the target dummies. Then after the build is shown and explained in its entirety, I will then show you some alternative gear choices you can use in case you don't have any specific piece of gear or are not comfortable with some of these choices I have made.
Is that appropriate? What the fuck? I don't like that at all. Okay, I'm going to the bathroom now. I'm getting bad vibes from this room.
Keep in mind, some of the gear choices made are irreplaceable for this build to work, but the ones that can afford to be changed will be changed. And of course, I'm not covering every gear choice in the game. That would be crazy. And that will be basically it. Of course, keep in mind, this is the cookie cutter build. This is the build most rogues are using, just with a few changes here and there. Future build videos that are coming in are more my style. I'm not going to say which build is the best one of the lot. You'll just have to see for yourself. And the format used in this video will be applied to the other build videos in this series as well, which I said was Pick Your Poison. So after that long-winded but much needed explanation, let's begin.
Cannot win this battle unless we have an advantage in artillery.
Swing those hammers, slugs! We've orders to fill! No slacking now! Independent pace!
Valindra ends here. I swear it.
undead bodyguards.
To succeed in our mission, we must stop the production of undead, prevent the animation of the dead dragon Loragoth, and slay Valindra.
So before I begin explaining each build choice, let's talk about stat caps. As a rogue, your main focus should be power first, as it increases your damage and it's the most important stat. Second, you should focus on combat advantage, since it also increases your damage when you are flanking your enemies. Then focus on crit strike and crit severity, since they go hand in hand. Crit strike increases the amount of crit strikes you land, and crit severity increases the damage done by said crit strikes. And lastly, accuracy is your so-called dump stat, which reduces your enemy's ability to deflect your attacks. People call it a dump stat, but that doesn't mean it's useless. I think it's underrated in general, and it does increase your damage regardless. As far as defensive stats go, focus on defense. Awareness is also very good, but there aren't enough sources in the game to elevate the awareness stat naturally like defense does. So as long as you focus on these stats, you will be increasing your damage. The goal is obviously to cap them all at 90% if possible, or as close to 90% as possible. Capping at least 4 of the offensive is what you should strive for anyways. Race choice. As far as races go, there are no super huge differences no matter what choice you make, but they do have some benefits depending on the class or what you need most stats wise. For the rogues, there are 3 main DPS races that I prefer: the normal Dragonborn or the Metallic, which I consider one race, the Gith, and the Wood Elf. The Dragonborn grants you 3% power and 3% crit strike, which obviously both work towards capping those 2 specific stats. The Gith grants us 5% combat advantage and the Wood Elf 5% to crit strike. I personally prefer the Dragonborn or the Gith, but for this build I am using the Metallic Dragonborn. Reason is simple: you get 1 extra percent total to your stats, 6% as opposed to 5%, but if your build suffers from combat advantage, then use Gith, or the Wood Elf if you lack crit strike. The race itself doesn't grant you more damage. The stat bonuses, however, can help you cap your stats, which in turn will help you deal more damage. Does that make sense? Good. For the ability stats and the character creation as a Dragonborn, choose Strength and Charisma. You can also choose Dexterity instead of Charisma, but since Dexterity increases crit severity and crit severity is very easy to cap with consumables in-game, we choose Charisma for the recharge speed instead. Same reasoning applies for your in-game ability stats. Put all your points into Strength and Charisma.
Valindra ends here. I swear it.
The Paragon path I chose is obvious. I chose Assassin. Assassin is better overall in both single target and AoE damage. Despite what some Whisper Knife players might be trying to tell you, the only place where Whisper Knife can compete with Assassin is during mob phases, and even then a decent Assassin can still outdamage a Whisper Knife. And trust me, I've run with tons of endgame Whisper Knives. Whisper Knife in general needs a bit more love, but until then, Assassin is the go-to choice overall. Sorry Whisper Knives, it's just the way it is. Now, it's time to get to the good stuff. Gear choices. For the helm, we have chosen the Garistro's Horns. The obvious reason for this choice is for the equip bonus this helm provides us. You can gain up to 10% critical strike at max stacks, and there is no other helm that provides such a huge boost to our crit percentage, so this helm is critical. See what I did there? For this specific build and for capping crit strike. Garistro Horns have a great item level and the combined rating is also pretty good. The cost of making the lure to get the horns isn't very high or very grindy, but it can get a bit expensive depending on how unkind RNG can be and how many lures you'll need until the horn drops for you. Overall, the usual drop rate is around 1 horn per 10 to 15 hunts on average, so its RNG seems to be halfway decent, especially compared to other gear pieces in the game. In general, the Graceful Horns are fairly easy to obtain considering its endgame gear at the moment. All you have to do is go do the tier 1 White Horn hunt in the Scab area located in Avernus. Next is the armor choice. For the armor, there is only one choice, and it is sadly irreplaceable and has been since Avernus was released. And that armor piece is called the Bone Devil's Ribcage. This armor piece is leaps and bounds better than any other armor piece in the game. There is no alternative to what it provides you. The item level is decent and so is the combined rating, but the equip bonus is beyond bonkers. At max stats, you can get up to 12.5% crit strike and 12.5% crit severity at once, so 25% to those specific stats. That's huge amounts of percentage stats being applied to your character. And while the ribcage is insanely good, it also has a very shitty RNG and very shitty accessibility. And the cost of the lure is crazy too. There is no easy way to grind the lure. It takes time and effort, and if you wanted to buy the lure, it varies between 5 million astral diamonds and 8 million. And obviously those are PC prices. And even that price can sometimes go higher. And there's also no guarantee when you buy the lure that the ribcage will drop for you. On average, for most players, it's between 5 and 10 lures. Some unlucky folks have actually used way more than 5 lures, so imagine the cost of just 5 lures and no ribcage to drop, let alone more. Yeah, beyond ridiculous. The ribcage can be found by doing the tier 3 hunt in Avernus called Night Spine, and just like the Greastor Horns, the ribcage also is irreplaceable for this specific build to work. Next, we have the arm piece. Here, I have chosen the wrist guards of Precipitation. The item level is super high and so is the combined rating, but the true power of these arms is in the equip bonus. At max stacks, you get 7,500 power. The power fluctuates in battle, but for the most part you have max stacks all the time during combat. These types of gloves used to be useless in previous mods because power was extremely easy to cap, but ever since Dragonbone Veil was released, our item level has jumped from the low 60,000s to the high 70s and low 80s, and we don't have enough power to compensate for such a huge item level difference. So these gloves are beyond perfect for helping you cap at the moment. Getting the wrist guards is not that hard accessibility wise. All you have to do is be able to join Vault of Stars, and then just do the first mini boss over and over until they drop for you. The drop rate is quite decent. The only problem is that mini bosses drop tons of different gear pieces, so it can take a while sometimes to get what you want to drop, but you can spam the mini boss very quickly over and over and over again, so it doesn't seem as bad. There are actually people who form groups to do this sort of farm. These arms can be replaced by other power gloves, but I wouldn't recommend it for this build. You can find these gloves, like I said, at the first mini boss in the hardcore Vault of Stars dungeon. Next, we have the weapons, and the choice for this AoE build is the Lionheart. Item level is decent and the combined rating isn't bad either. The main reason I chose these weapons is for the 7.5% outgoing damage when your stamina is above 75%. And if you are a good rogue, you will rarely waste any stamina ever, so that damage will pretty much be constant. You can find the Lionheart weapons as an RNG drop from the Tower of the Mad Mage, from an NPC where you can trade scrolls for the weapons. You basically need 20 completions for each weapon, so 40 in total. Or you can buy them from the auction house. At Green, they're around 1.5 million astral diamonds on PC. So in general, the accessibility is there via the auction house. The rest just depends on RNG and completions. For me, the cost if you bought them isn't too bad. It could have been much worse. And obviously these weapons are not irreplaceable. There is one set of weapons that is better than the Lionhearts, but it's situational. And that's the Mastercraft weapons, which grants you 10% outgoing damage if everybody in the party is using them as well. Also, you can replace Lionhearts with the Mirage weapons if you don't have them. The damage difference is minimal and you'll hardly notice it. The only downside using Mirage is you often waste the bonus on mobs. So the Lionhearts are my go-to choice since Mastercraft groups are very rare. Also, the main hand modification is the Enhanced Duelist Flurry, which increases the damage dealt by Duelist Flurry by 10%. And for the offhand modifications, I use the 2.5% recharge speed and the accuracy. Next, for the boots, I use the Primal Raid Bootisi.
This is where we make our stand.
They have a very low item level and combined rating, but they have an equip bonus that more than makes up for it. The equip bonus is when you kill an enemy, you gain 3% action points. So for example, if you kill 5 mobs, that's 15% action point gain. If you kill 10 mobs, it's 30%. And in mob phases as rogues, we generally kill a lot. In parties, we're mostly the ones getting the most kills overall when it comes to mobs. So if you are capping your combat advantage or close to it, the primal boots are super beneficial as they help you spam your dailies more often. And our dailies, especially Whirlwind of Blades, gives us up to 15% damage, and that's not including the 5% from Invisible Infiltrator. So more dailies equals more overall damage. There are some doubters when it comes to these boots, but I don't care. I have seen the difference, I have tried and tested the difference, and I'm sticking to it as it significantly increased my damage output in AoE situations with ton of mobs around me. And you have nothing to lose using them if your combat advantage is already capped, so I don't see the issue. The cost is also super low at 2,500 Chultan Riches in the Chult campaign store. However, even though they are my first choice, they are not irreplaceable. The Wasteland Wanderers and the Rusted Iron Leggings are also very good. I just think primals are better, especially if you're capping, and they definitely work wonders for my build. Next, we have the Artifact set, which contains the neck belt and main artifact. They are the Mythallar Shard, the Mythallar Piece, and the Mythallar Fragment. This artifact set has a very high item level and combined rating. But the bonus is what makes this set so potent, as it does an additional hit worth 100 magnitude damage when you deal combat advantage damage. And for us rogues, that's almost always. The set is particularly good if you have the Band of Air, as it helps you proc it more often. Keep that in mind, since without the Band of Air, the demo set might be a slightly better choice, but not by much. There are so many pros to the set. It costs nothing to get and there's no RNG to it since it's free by going through the Dragonbone Veil campaign. So its accessibility is very high, but it is replaceable, depending on what you have or what you are using ring-wise. The demo set is the next best thing if you haven't got the Mythallar set yet, which would be weird since it's so easy to obtain through the campaign. And like I said, the demo set is slightly better in my opinion if you're not using the Band of Air, but the difference is minimal, so it doesn't matter. Next, we move to our 2 ring choices, and the Red Eyes Glare is our first choice of the 2.
How dare you interrupt me? Slay these mortals!
This ring is amazing all around. It has a high item level and a decent combined rating. The stat bonus of 4,500 crit severity is extremely good to help you cap your stats, but what makes this ring awesome is the 7.5% stats it grants you in total. 5% to power, which is the best stat to focus on, and 2.5% accuracy to go along with it. The ring is a must-have to help you cap your power, especially since the release of Dragonbone Veil. For me, the ring is irreplaceable, but it doesn't mean you can't figure out power without it. It just makes life a lot harder if you're not using this ring. The ring does have a downside. The RNG is horrible. Granted, not for everybody, but for most people. It can take one run to get it or hundreds. I know people to this day that have done over 500 plus or more runs and still haven't had it drop. That's absolutely crazy. I have personally done over 3,000 Vault of Stars runs, and I'm still missing one ring from the collection, believe it or not. The accessibility is quite decent if you could just at least queue for the Vault of Stars, and then you have a chance to get the ring if you can actually complete it. So personally, I love the ring, and I don't remove it. Next, we have the much sought after but very grindy and difficult to obtain Band of Air.
Mortals, and bring their skulls to my town!
This ring has very high item level and a decently high combined rating, and a very useful 3,375 crit severity to help you cap. But what makes this ring so awesome is its equip power, which despite its low chance of only 10% to get procced, when it does, it deals significant damage, and is one of the highest damage dealing sources of your overall damage, anywhere between 10% to 20% or more of your total damage output. Storyteller's books, Ferocity, some overloads, and certain artifact sets help you proc the ring even more, thus dealing even more damage. The huge main issue with this incredibly powerful ring is how difficult it is to add to your arsenal. You need 4 reagents to craft it, and they all come from hardcore Vault of Stars by killing the 3 mini-bosses and then the last boss. Each reagent seems to have a different and unique to itself drop rate, which is extremely weird. The last reagent when you complete the last boss has an extremely high drop rate of around 70%. The very first boss has a decent drop rate. The second mini-boss has a below average drop rate, and the third mini-boss has the shittiest drop rate ever. It took me 700 runs just to get the third reagent alone. So you can see how not many players have the luxury of having the Band of Air. It also requires no deaths in the group and the reagents to actually drop as well, and a huge amount of effort to get all these runs completed. So most of you sadly won't have this ring. but luckily there are alternatives, just not as powerful. Now let's go to the shirt choice. In that position, I have chosen the corroded shirt of the Dragon Cult.
We cannot win this battle unless we have an advantage in artillery.
It has a very good item level and combined rating, and this shirt also has the added and newly brought to shirts bonus of 1.5% recharge speed, which isn't much, but it all adds up. But the main reason this shirt is my main choice is for the 5% combat advantage gain. And since I'm not using the Wasteland Wanderer boots in this build, this allows me to use the Primal boots, since I can get the combat advantage back that I had originally lost. And it also has 2 offensive stats, a high item level and combined rating, but the bonus of 5% combat advantage is what makes this shirt such an attractive choice. Another reason this shirt is an attractive choice is for the cost. When I checked today, it was under 1,000 Astral Diamonds, so super cheap. You can also get them for free from the mini bosses in the Dragonbone Vale area. I mean, if there is none available in the auction house and you're super cheap. And the drop rate is super good. You'll fill up your bags with these shirts in no time. Obviously, there are replacements for this shirt and a few other good choices out there, but none that give you 5% combat advantage. So this shirt is awesome for this build. Next, we have the pants.
Slugs, we've orders to fill.
Here I have chosen the Velvet +1 pants. They have a decent item level and combined rating, and the bonus is one of the good ones, gaining 25 action points per critical strike. But I mostly picked these pants for a filler for its offensive stats, since not many pants out there have double offensive stats. These are also very cheap. You can get them around 10,000 Astral Diamonds on PC in the auction house, or they can actually be crafted. There are replacements for this with higher item level or different stats, so I wouldn't worry too much about the pants. I just chose them for the offensive. And last, we have the rest of the artifact choices for the last 3 spots available. And here we will have none other than the Storyteller's Journals. They all have very low item level individually and combined rating, but there's nothing we can do about that. I use the Envenom Journal as my summon for the AP gain and the stun. That's why actually some people call it Stun Book instead of a journal. And then we have the Frozen Journal and the Flayed Journal as the other 2 to complete the 3 empty artifact slots and to gain the set bonus. This set grants you power, health points, and an extra hit to weapon damage every time you crit. It increases your overall attributes by 1, and you have a chance to deal additional unresistible damage equal to 10% of your weapon damage. And that's not including the pages you can add to the journals as well, like increased damage by 5%, AP gains, and stuns. It's overall the best trio artifact set in the game, but it's a bit expensive at around 2.5 million per artifact in the auction house on PC at the moment. There are some replacements to this, but not nearly as powerful and not for this build, because this build relies on that set to help proc the Band of Air and for the damage the set provides. You can find the artifacts or the packs for them in the auction house and occasionally in the Zen store every so often, until of course they're not there ever again. But for now, we use the journals. And before I forget, let's talk about the armor reinforcements. I personally use critical strike on all armor pieces, so that's the head, chest, arms, and boots. And I use the combat advantage reinforcements on my neck, rings, and belt. Each one grants you 880 stats each if you get the +1s, and have a very low item level of 44 each. The armor reinforcements are replaceable with any stats you need, so you can mix and match or just use power, or crit, or accuracy, or whatever you need. But personally, like I said, for the reinforcements on the neck, I personally go combat advantage, but you can actually use stamina gain if you capped your CA and don't need it. Basically, it's your choice. This is just what I go for in this build. Now that the gear is out of the way and you have an understanding of why each choice was made, let's move on to the enchantment choices.
No slacking now.
For all the offensive enchantment slots, I chose Jade for the crit strike, and in the defensive slots, I chose Garnet for the defense. The item level and combined rating on enchantments at max level are really high. 4 Jades on the offensive slots grant me a total of 10,000 crit strike, and the 4 on the defensive side grant me 10,000 defense. Obviously, you can mix and match here and choose what other enchantments you need. I prefer Jade and Garnet to make this build work. For utility, I have chosen Garnet again for the 2,250 Forte, which helps push my stats towards being capped. Sadly, getting these to Mythic from Blue is very expensive, and so is buying them from the auction house. They are around 5 to 6 million Astral Diamonds at Mythic in the auction house right now. They are all replaceable depending on what stats you need, so just because I use Jade doesn't mean you have to, but it would help you cap if you're trying to follow or copy this build. For For bonus enchantments, I use the 50% movement speed, which is insanely good since being slow sucks. And I don't think the recharge speed bonus enchantment is good enough because it only gives you 5% recharge speed. The only time I would consider recharge speed if it was like 15%, just like the speed is. The bonus enchantment generally has no item level or combined rating for some random reason, but it is expensive to create or buy just like the other enchantments are. So like I said, you can replace the movement speed with recharge speed, but I wouldn't do that since movement speed is much more beneficial when it's 15% versus 5% recharge speed. And as a rogue, we want to be fast as possible. Then last we have the weapon enchantment choice. Here of course we chose the Poison Thorn, which is the old Bile Thorn, and at the moment it does the most damage, and stacking those DOTs is always fun. It has a crazy high item level of 5000 but no combined rating at all, and is for some reason cheaper than normal enchantments at around 2.5 million on PC. You can replace this with something else, but you'll do less damage if you do. So for DPS, Poison Thorns is definitely the go-to, so I'd stick with that. And as far as overloads go, I use the Precision for the 5% accuracy and 5% crit strike. And you can also use Rage of Flames for 5% extra damage, or the Black Ice Overload for the stats and the AP gain. Next, let's go to the companion choices, both summon and utility, and of course the companion gear. As summon, I use the Owlbear Cub. The main reason for this is because of the huge amount of stats I gain towards capping my overall percentages using this companion. Its enhancement at Mythic grants us 7,500 stats to accuracy, combat advantage, and crit severity. And especially since in the new module capping stats is much more of a struggle, the Owlbear fits in perfectly. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using striker companions, you'll just have a much harder time capping using them. For companion gear, I'm not using any of the new 1400 item level gear. I'm using the glistening companion gear because it grants more stats to one singular stat, and that's what I was looking for in this build. And they also have a pretty high item level and combined rating. I use the glistening sword knot for the 1950 accuracy, the glistening icon for the crit strike, and the glistening grimoire for the combat advantage. The companion enhancement is of course the same for everybody, which increases your augment's bonus stats by 7,500 when equipped. In utility slots, I use acute senses for the 7.5% combat advantage. I use the Minsk companion for the 5.6 to 8.6 versus strong enemies damage. The stronger the enemy, the higher the damage goes. And I'm also using the Neverwinter Knight for the 7.5% outgoing damage. The next two companions I'm going to talk about work hand in hand, and that's the Drist and the Wolfgar. Drist grants me 4.7 crit strike and 4.7 crit severity, while Wolfgar grants me 4.7 accuracy and 4.7 combat advantage. You have to use them together. If you remove one or the other, the percentage drops to 3.8. Since you gain 25% of the other companion's bonus, because they belong to the companion of the Hall set, which gives you said bonus. And lastly, we use the Alchemist for the crit strike and the combat advantage. Obviously, all these companions can be replaced, but with a less than favorable outcome, especially if you remove Drist and Wolfgar. But if you find a better way to get the same results, then go for it. This is what works for this build, and you'll see the stats later on in this video when I test it on target dummies. All companion used here are mythic and have 750 item level and 750 combined rating. Some of these companions though are super expensive. Drist is around 9 million astral diamonds in the auction house. Wolfgar was around 7 million. Minsk was just under 1 million. Neverwinter Night comes from Echoes of Prophecy, so basically free. And the Alchemist is only around 100k astral diamonds. And then we have the Owlbear Cub, which is around 2.5 million to 4 million astral diamonds at Epic. They are not cheap, but that is what I'm using, and that's what works for this build.
Valindra ends here. I swear it.
My Insignia bonuses of choice are 1 Artificer's Persuasion, 2 Assassin's Covenants, and 2 Gladiator Guiles. Sadly, there are not many Insignia bonuses worth our while, so I use 2 Covenants for the extra stats. Granted, the second Assassin's gives me only half of what the first one does, but that's more than enough to help with capping. I also use 2 Gladiator's Guiles for more run speed, and 1 Persuasion for the 2-second reduced cooldown when I use an artifact, which isn't much, but it's better than nothing. The actual insignias are all power and forte, except for the enlightened insignias. They are forte and crit severity. So as you can see, the main focus is power and forte, with a little bit of crit severity sprinkled in there. Collars, I use the crit severity collar for 5% crit severity at Mythic, the encounter collar for 5% more damage when I use said encounters, and it's better than the at will collar because the at will collar only affects the at will and its bleeds. The Encounter Collar, however, helps stack up toxic blades more than the At Will, thus giving us more damage. Then I use the Astral Diamonds Collar, which is only useful for item level combined rating and upping damage due to said item level and combined rating. Since getting 10% more Astral Diamonds from the collar does nothing for my character's overall damage, I also use the 5% Stamina Collar and the 5% Movement Speed Collar. Reasons are obvious. For boons, I'll just show you them and you can copy or see which ones I'm using for yourself, since it would take forever to mention them all. One thing I do want to mention though is that I don't use any boons which increase my overall health points. The reason behind this choice is the more health you have, the harder it is to proc the Ribcage and Garistor's horns. Not that it's super hard to begin with, it just makes it easier to keep those stacks up for longer if you don't have to put more effort into it. And my survivability is just fine at around 900k without it, so it doesn't really matter. So I just allocated those boons into like types of monster damage like cultists or whatever else. But feel free to use health boons if you have issues with survivability. And for guild boons, I use the crit strike and defense. The other two don't matter, like mount speed and PvP boons. They don't matter at all. And lastly, let's go to powers. For AoE, main daily is Whirlwind of Blades, since hitting 5 targets with it grants us up to 15% more damage, so that's 3% from each mob because you have a max of 5 mobs you can hit. Class encounters are the Path of Blade, Smoke Bomb, and Blade Flurry. At wills, I use Duelist Flurry and Gloaming Cut. But you do want to focus more on using Gloaming Cut on mob phases since it hits harder and you gain more AP. And for class features, I use Oppressive Darkness mostly, or some Skillful Infiltrator for more speed depending on the situation. But Oppressive Darkness does grant you more damage than Skillful Infiltrator. And I use Invisible Infiltrator for the 5% more damage and Stealth Refill after using a daily. And I also use the Awakened Forges box on my power tray and sometimes the Neverwinter Hawk for some extra damage, but the Forges box is more than adequate. And before I forget, for feats I use Toxic Blades, Master of Shadows, Duelist Expertise, Back Alley Tactics, and Execution. Also for mounts, I used to use Arcane Maelstrom, but because of the nerf, it's not going to be as powerful, but it's still good, so you can still use it. I'd either use that, the Pegasus, or Divine Intervention. And I also use Ferocity to help proc the Band of Air. Ferocity is good even without the Band of Air, but you just have to get hit. That's the prerequisite. You get hit, you do more damage. If you don't, you don't. So, Ferocity is a toss-up. That totally depends on you. I personally use it for the Band of Air, and it's doing pretty good.
In our mission, we must stop the production of undead, prevent the animation of the dead dragon Loragoth, and slay Valindra.
So that's it. That's the cookie cutter build with some small changes to it that most rogues are using. This was the first build of the series and I have at least 3 more coming, including single target builds, so stay tuned, they are on the way. Hope this helped and that you enjoyed this new video format. Anyways, I gotta go. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Following the builds coming up, so give me a little bit of time. And that's about it. Hope this helps. Galactic here. Peace out. Stay safe.
Valindra ends here. I swear it.
You